Braking from Austin, the Ferrari garage goes silent as Fred Vasseur stares at the telemetry. Something inside Lewis Hamilton's car doesn't add up. Energy loss, heat spikes, and a mysterious structural fault. What the team found after the race left even the French engineer speechless. And yet, despite it all, Hamilton had just dragged that damaged SF-25 to fourth place. Pure control, pure resilience. From the very first lap, something was wrong. It wasn't obvious to the crowd, but Hamilton felt it instantly. The power delivery was uneven, the rhythm off. Losing energy out of turn 11, he said over the radio, his voice steady but sharp. The response came seconds later. We see it, Lewis. Keep managing. But even through the radio static, there was hesitation. The engineers at the pit wall didn't understand what they were seeing. The hybrid system was misbehaving, energy deploying in bursts, recovery spikes where there shouldn't be any. The SF-25 wasn't following its own logic. Fred Vasseur leaned over the telemetry monitors, his jaw tightening. He'd been in this sport long enough to recognize when numbers told the wrong story. The data was chaotic, inconsistent voltage, erratic heat signatures, hybrid discharge patterns that made no sense. That's not a power unit issue, he murmured. That's structure. He didn't need to raise his voice. The tone was enough to send engineers rushing to check every subsystem. For Ferrari, the word structure was a nightmare. It meant something physical, something fundamental. And in the world of Formula One, structural problems don't go away. They grow. Out on track, Hamilton didn't flinch. Every lap, the Ferrari felt heavier, the energy system more unpredictable. But this was Lewis Hamilton. 2 decades of racing had taught him how to turn chaos into rhythm. Instead of fighting the problem, he studied it. He adapted. He began lifting earlier, braking smoother, altering his torque demand mid-corner. He didn't ask for sympathy. He asked for control. Give me stability, he told the pit wall. His voice wasn't frustrated, it was analytical. He was mapping the car's failure in real time, using instinct where technology had failed. From the grandstands, no one could tell. The red Ferrari still looked fast, elegant even, carving through the high-speed S's of Sector 1. But behind the illusion was a battle only Hamilton could feel. The hybrid system's erratic behavior was throwing the balance off, forcing him to improvise on every corner. When the telemetry showed a power drop down the main straight, Hamilton compensated by adjusting brake balance and throttle timing manually, something no driver should have to do mid-race. He was piloting not just a car, but a malfunctioning equation, balancing chaos on instinct alone. Then came the realization and the silence that followed. In the closing laps, Vasseur finally saw the truth on his screen. The floor had overheated. A microscopic delamination near the rear Venturi tunnel was disturbing airflow beneath the car. It was a structural wound, invisible from above but devastating below. The airflow broke, the pressure fluctuated, and the hybrid sensors tied to aerodynamic load began to misread energy flow. The SF-25 was literally confusing its own electronics. He's driving a ghost, one engineer whispered. Vasseur didn't answer. He just watched the live timing. Hamilton still in fourth, still matching the cars ahead, carrying a broken Ferrari on nothing but feel. The data told a strange tale. The hybrid energy system, usually a masterpiece of precision, was showing inconsistencies so erratic they looked random. Energy deployment dropped 8% on lap 32, spiked back to full power 2 laps later, then vanished completely for seconds in the final stint. The temperatures beneath the rear floor were higher than the simulations had ever predicted. Something had gone wrong deep inside the car's structure, a failure, invisible from the outside, but devastating to performance. When the engineers began dismantling the SF-25, the silence broke. Look at this, one of them said, shining a light beneath the rear Venturi tunnel. A small section of the carbon floor, no larger than a sheet of paper, had started to bubble, its resin layers separated by extreme heat. It was subtle, nearly invisible, but catastrophic in effect. Vasseur crouched down, inspecting it closely. Delamination, he said quietly. It's been flexing mid-race. The words hung heavy. In modern Formula One, a moving floor means lost airflow and chaos for every sensor that depends on aerodynamic stability. Hamilton had been right from a start. When he'd radioed, "I'm losing energy out of turn 11," he wasn't describing electronics. He was describing airflow. The car was physically lying to him. The hybrid sensors were feeding false readings because the floor had changed shape at speed. The ERS system thought the car was unstable, so it began limiting recovery to protect the battery. The software was fighting ghosts, unaware that the true problem was structural. For an engineer, it was a nightmare. For a driver, it was a disaster waiting to happen. But what amazed the team most wasn't the failure, it was how Hamilton had handled it. They replayed his onboard footage in slow motion. Every corner told a story. Tiny steering inputs, precise throttle management, and subtle changes in gear timing. He had instinctively compensated for a car that was bleeding efficiency. He was managing the floor through feel, said one of the aerodynamicists, almost in disbelief. That's not something you can train. That's experience. In the debrief, Vasseur looked at his engineers, then at the data, then back at the car. He shouldn't have been able to finish in that condition, he said. And yet, he was faster in the final laps than cars that were perfectly healthy. It was true, the lap charts confirmed it. Hamilton's pace in the closing 10 laps was consistent within 0.2. In a car that was literally losing aerodynamic integrity, that level of precision bordered on impossible. As midnight approached, the analysis continued. Maranello's remote engineering unit joined the video call, their voices echoing through the garage. They confirmed the cause. A heat-induced composite failure had warped the rear floor, confusing the aerodynamic load sensors tied to the hybrid control. The car was interpreting drag as energy loss, one technician explained. So it limited deployment to avoid overheating. It was protecting itself from itself. Vasseur exhaled slowly. And Lewis protected us from a retirement, he said. Outside, the Austin circuit was empty, but inside the Ferrari garage, the tone had changed. What started as a technical failure had become something more profound, a testament to Hamilton's adaptability. He hadn't just survived the car's breakdown, he had outthought it. He'd turned instinct into computation, becoming the system the Ferrari had lost. That's what separates him from the rest, Vasseur finally said. He doesn't drive around problems. He drives through them. The next morning, as the team packed the garage, Hamilton walked in briefly, calm and composed. He asked only one question. Did you find what was wrong? Vasseur nodded. Yes, he said. And you were right. Hamilton smiled faintly. Good. Let's fix it for Mexico. Then he turned and walked out. No drama, no speeches, just quiet confidence. Back in Maranello, dawn broke over the Ferrari factory with a kind of silence that only follows defeat. The trucks from Austin had arrived in the early hours, bringing back what was left of the weekend data drives, burnt-out tires, and one wounded SF-25. Fred Vasseur was already waiting. He hadn't slept. The discovery in Austin had disturbed him not just as a team principal, but as an engineer. Something inside the car had betrayed their design philosophy, and he wanted answers before anyone else did. In the technical hall, the disassembled Ferrari sat on a carbon fiber platform under cold white light. Around it stood some of the brightest minds in racing: aerodynamicists, hybrid specialists, materials engineers. For them, this was no longer about the U.S. Grand Prix. It was about understanding how a microscopic flaw could humiliate a factory of thousands, and how a driver somehow had concealed that flaw for 56 laps. The engineers began the investigation layer by layer. The telemetry alignment confirmed what the Austin team had found. Fluctuating hybrid regeneration correlated perfectly with a localized loss of pressure under the floor. Then came the material analysis. When the composite section from the rear Venturi tunnel was scanned under thermal imaging, the result was unmistakable. The carbon weave had separated a thermal delamination caused by excessive stress and resonance vibration. A mechanical chain reaction had begun mid-race, twisting the aerodynamic load and confusing every energy recovery sensor. The car had, in Vasseur's words, lost its aerodynamic truth. He studied the graphs in silence. So the sensors were right, he said finally. They just didn't know why. The engineers nodded. The ERS system, tied directly to the aerodynamic load model, had interpreted the turbulence as drag variation and began compensating by adjusting torque delivery. It was as if the car's own software was gaslighting itself. Hamilton had been driving a machine that couldn't trust its own reflection. Vasseur called an internal review with his top technical officers. The tone was sharp but not angry. We build the fastest machines in the world, he said, but it means nothing if the driver can't feel confidence. Lewis knew the car was lying before the data did. That's what we should be building for drivers like him, who can sense truth through vibration. It wasn't a reprimand. It was a declaration of priorities. Meanwhile, word of Ferrari's post-race analysis began to spread through the paddock. Rival engineers were quietly impressed by Hamilton's adaptability. Adrian Newey, now consulting with Aston Martin, reportedly told his team, "It's not just reflexes. That's mechanical empathy, the rarest skill of all. Only the greats have it: Prost, Senna, Alonso, and now Hamilton with that Ferrari. Fernando Alonso himself echoed that sentiment publicly. Speaking to Sky Sports, he said, "I watched him closely in Austin. His rear end was unstable from lap 20 onward. Any other driver would have spun. Lewis didn't. He changed his rhythm, shorter braking, lighter throttle, and he still managed to keep the tires alive. That's not luck, that's understanding." It wasn't flattery. It was recognition, one champion acknowledging another's depth of craft. Inside Ferrari, the respect grew quietly but powerfully. Engineers began rewatching Hamilton's onboards not as analysis, but as education. His throttle traces became case studies. His brake modulation patterns were copied into training simulations for young drivers in the academy. One senior aerodynamicist remarked, "It's like he was speaking to the car in its own language, telling it to calm down." Fred Vasseur prepared his final report to the board. The document was short 3 pages, clear and direct. It outlined the physical cause, thermal delamination, the systemic reaction, sensor confusion, and the human factor, driver compensation. The final line read simply, "We did not lose a podium because of the car. We finished 4th because of the driver." When the board meeting concluded, Vasseur received a brief message from Hamilton himself. "Thank you for being honest," it read. "We'll fix it together." For Vasseur, that meant more than any podium. He knew that honesty builds trust, and trust is what wins championships.